Hello everyone, so my name is Kayla and today I'm here to talk to you about the time period of Germany from about 1930 to about 1938, where Germany transitioned from authoritarianism to totalitarianism. Just a little disclaimer, German words I'm not good at pronouncing, so please forgive me for when those come up. The first question we have to answer is who ruled Germany from March 1930 to January 1933? Simply put, this is the new conservatives, and the chancellors took the prime position of power because of a constitutional emergency. Now, what we see here is since Heinrich Brüning, he was the first chancellor to take this kind of power, and with him was the end of like the parliament democracy. So a few notable things that happened under the New Conservatives was how they handled the Great Depression. So the first thing was the German people, of course, were concerned with unemployment and not having jobs and the decrease in standard of living. But the New Conservatives were kind of not really listening to them. Instead, they decided to focus on maintaining the value of the German mark and making sure that the inflation didn't rise too much. Also notable during like the New Conservative reign was that they tried to maintain good relations with the Nazis, and they saw them as a potential ally because the Nazis were gaining a lot of popular support during this time, and they thought, well, the Nazis aren't communists, so they can't be bad. So they kind of teamed up with them, and the second chancellor, Papen, he revoked the ban on the Nazi stormtroopers, which were the SA, and he also, per Hitler's request, granted them an election in 1932, where the German Nazi Party, they gained a lot of seats, and they actually gained the majority of the seats in the Reichstag. And of course, like you give a little, you expect to receive a little. The New Conservatives thought, no, like we did all these things for the Nazis, and hopefully they'll support our reign, they'll support the New Conservatives now. But rather, Hitler was like, no, we want the chancellorship to go to a Nazi. We want a Nazi person in that position of power. But the New Conservatives weren't listening to that, and they refused Hitler's request. And this created a hostile environment in the Reichstag, in the legislative branch. So what we see here is like the government was really unstable now. So this led to the Nazi rise to power. Now, the Nazis were in the right time at the right place. They were in the position like where the Great Depression was really fostering this fear and this terror, and the people and the Nazis ran off that. And they gained a lot of their support from the middle class and the upper class and the well-to-do people. And they actually began to peak in their power near the end of 1932 because of lack of financial resources, a disunity amongst all them. They had a lack of cohesiveness now, and also they were not gaining as much popular support. Fortunately for Hitler, though, he struck a deal with this man up there, Papen, the second chancellor that was actually not in the chancellor position at this time, but he somehow got behind the scenes, and they had like secret meetings, and they formed a coalition, and they were like, okay, Hitler can be chancellor, then Papen can be vice chancellor. Now, the government was so unstable at this point that Hindenburg, the president, even though he didn't really like Hitler, he decided that this was probably the best bet in order to like ensue some stability in Germany. So this is where the establishment of Nazi totalitarianism really started to come about. Hitler had this term, it's Gleichschaltung, which is like synchronization, and the main goals of this was to seize all political power except the Nazi Party, have like state-sponsored terror, establish Hitler's dictatorship, and also have the German people following Nazi values and ideas. So what Hitler did for the economy, he decided not to focus on maintaining the value of their currency, rather to focus on unemployment. So there's Hitler over there helping build the Autobahn. He put in place like many public work projects to help with this unemployment, and he did. And 11 months after he started his reign, unemployment decreased by 2 million people. So, and it only decreased further after that. We also see that Hitler really wanted to become self-sufficient. So traditionally, Germany was kind of like the ones that exported the finished goods and then imported like the food, the raw materials. But Hitler wanted to like maintain his nation just by himself. So what we see here is Hitler placed a lot of things to try to establish this, but really nothing stuck. Nothing really made the Germans self-sufficient throughout this time. Now we're going to switch our focus to the SA and the SS. So the SA were the stormtroopers, and they were kind of the ones that were there since Hitler, before he had the chancellorship. And once he attained this chancellor position, they were like, well, now we can go crazy, we can do whatever we want. And they established like concentration camps with like Hitler's political opponents. And of course, there was also like terrorizing the Jews and stuff. But Hitler was like, the Nazis are going to be around for a long time. We don't need to do everything this way right now. We can take it kind of easy route. But Hitler at the same time knew that the leader of the SA was not going to listen to him. So what he had was the SS, the Secret Service kind of, come in and execute a lot of the major SA leaders. So this saw the fall of the SA and the rise of the SS. And what the outside world kind of looked at this like, the German military, the new conservatives, they were like, Germany is finally, the Nazi party is finally inching towards moderation. They're cutting off the radical branch of the SA. But of course, they weren't inching towards moderation. Rather, they were taking another step towards Hitler's dictatorship. So one of the main turning points in Hitler gaining like total control was the Reichstag fire. So what happened here was the legislative building of the Reichstag was set fire by, I think, someone in the communist group. And so Hitler blamed this on the communists and kind of like struck fear in the general public, like the communists are coming after us, they're trying to take over. And so he had this act, the Enabling Act, which is basically a decree, an act saying that the government can rule by decree for 4 years. And so the Reichstag quickly passed this through in hopes of like maintaining a safe government with no communists. And what we see here is a few months down the road that all political parties except the Nazi parties were banned, along with a lot of other things that really put Hitler in the prime position of power to have this totalitarianism government, meaning that everything, all the people, all the resources, the government was under Hitler's control. So what we see here is also the formation of the national community, the Volksgemeinschaft, and the basic definition of this.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Volksgemeinschaft.
German. Anyways, so yeah, this means that it's like a racially and politically positive state. So how do you establish this? Very simple. You cast aside everyone that Hitler doesn't like. So you cast out the Jews, you cast out the foreigners, the political opponents, the gypsies, yeah, the homosexuals, the mentally ill. And then you'll have this pure German state where Germany can thrive in. So if you were to live here during this time, you would have seen the Hitler Youth become compulsory. So in 1936, if you had children, you had to send them off here where they would have been indoctrinated with Nazi beliefs. Of course, propaganda would have flooded the streets, German pride, things like that. Blacklistings, book burnings, things like that. Swastikas would have been a common household item now, something to show your respect to the government. Of course, the promotion of the Aryan race, the German blondes. Yeah, and also the rise of anti-Semitism. If you would have gone to university during this time, your liberal professors would have left, your Jewish professors would have left, any like Jewish concepts. So our book used the example of, instead of the theory of relativity by Einstein, who was of Jewish descent, you would have had like German physics. So your whole entire like education would have shifted to fit this German mold. And so he really began to kind of take over. And for the intellectual, they would have suffered, but for the average German, they really didn't notice that much change. Our book has a good quote in it. It's like the average German, it was accommodation and conformity rather than the complete change of lifestyle that was expected. So they didn't have to really drastically change their lives. They just had to adjust to what Hitler was putting in place. So that's more on the domestic side. Switching over to foreign relations, what we see, of course, Hitler's worldview, I think we've all heard before, race and space. He believed in a racially pure state, and he also wanted to create living space. Now, this was mainly in the Russian, the eastern side of things. So Russia was seen as the #1 enemy because Hitler looked at Russia and he was like, that's my land, like I deserve that land. He felt entitled to Russian land. And also, I'm guessing German and French relations were never really that great, so he kind of didn't really care about that side of things, but he wanted to maintain good relations with Great Britain because since they weren't going to have good relations with France, they better have good relations with Britain. And also, Hitler admired the way Great Britain ran their empire. So some major, yeah, no, he wasn't. So the foreign relations, some major um, events that happened during this time is the German-Polish friendship pact. So Hitler was like, "Don't worry, guys, we won't attack you for 10 years." Of course, this was broken later on. And we also see the demilitarization of the left bank of the Rhine. So Hitler came marching in with guns and stuff in the zone that wasn't supposed to have any military equipment. And France started freaking out, rightly so, because it was on their border. And they kind of nudged Great Britain, like, "Hey, help us out, help us retaliate against the Germans, or at least scold them severely or something like that." But Great Britain's like, "No, you're on your own." And so the only thing Hitler received from doing this action was kind of like a small tisk tisk, like, "You shouldn't do that, Germany, but we're not really going to do anything with arms against arms to fight you on this." And then we also see a bilateral agreement with Great Britain, and this basically reformed part of the Treaty of Versailles, and Great Britain agreed that "Hey, you can start building up your navy a little bit more. That's okay. The limits that were placed on you in the Treaty of Versailles, you can surpass those now. You can increase the size of your navy." So as you can see, this kind of definitely leads right into laying the foundation, priming Europe for the Second World War. And so, yeah, so that's basically the end for now. Sorry about that.
Yeah, very good. What this does highlight is that the people were so afraid of the communists, because they saw the violent revolution that they had led, and they thought that would actually take over. Yes.
That kind of happened in America. We have fear of Russians, and rightly so. But it wasn't I'm not saying it was anybody in Germany.
Sure.
People who which they were trying to do something.
Sure. Yeah, the Cold War after World War II.
The original Cold War, after Germany.
Right.
But not exactly.
Now where did our next presenter go?
So I thought that was going to be a fun idea.
Here you go.
Thanks.
All right, so here's our next presentation about indoctrination.
Yes, not just indoctrination and propaganda. I've been sick for about a week and a half, so I'm sorry about my voice.
Which is what we see with the news media every day.
Yes, indoctrination and propaganda.
Deja vu all over again.
Yeah, alright, so if I could have your attention. Have any of you ever heard of the movie called The Village?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I hate to ruin the plot for you, but it's one of my illustrations, so I'm going to tell you. The Village is special because it did something that was sort of new for its time. So the movie was based in colonial times. So we're talking about 1600s, 1700s. And, there was no modern technology in that time. And these people were told that they were not allowed to wear the color red because in the woods surrounding them were beasts. And so if they wore the color red, it would bring the beast in. And every once in a while, beasts would get into the village and wreak havoc. And everyone would be so confused. And so they would literally dig a hole and bury anything that was red in the ground. Because red was bad, yellow was good. So that's going to be one of my illustrations I'm going to pull in later. But it's a fascinating movie. And what happens later is that someone gets very sick, and the man just decides he's going to go through the woods and he's going to find someone to help. And so he goes through the woods. He ends up at this wall, and he scales the wall and he gets over it, and he's on a street and there's cars. And so it's at the end of the movie, and we're just like, what? So it was an experiment, basically. And I think Nazi Germany was kind of the same way. It was an experiment. And so anyways, all along he was actually in the 21st century. He just didn't know it.
Spoiler alert.
I said I was going to spoil it, but it's going to tie in later. All right.
Watching it now.
So a lot of people ask, how in the world could an entire nation be brainwashed to just annihilate the Jews and to just go forward with their evil plan. And I think it's kind of this, it's indoctrination and propaganda. So to give a little background.
Working?
No. I can just press the button.
Try the button.
This one? Or this one? Alright, I got it, sorry. I'm not good with technology either. Okay, so basically the plan was absolute maximum saturation and submersion. So indoctrination and propaganda were the means by which the Nazis aimed to secure voluntary support for the new regime. Coercion and terror were reserved for those individuals or groups who failed to respond or who were not included within the scope of the people's community, which was also known as Volksgemeinschaft. So I think it's important to make the differentiation of indoctrination versus propaganda. Indoctrination was the end goal and propaganda was the means. So yeah, so basically long-term indoctrination involved exposure to official propaganda. That's why you see posters all the time. And propaganda was related to the use of channels such as radio, cinema, and press. Indoctrination was a process of winning the people over through education, youth movements, workplaces, and armed forces. I'll try to give you guys enough time to write the blanks, but I think you're good. Is everyone good?
What's that last one?
Armed forces. So Hitler and his regime believed in centralizing everything. So power was all centralized. So basically, to the smallest person in the country, they answered to Hitler in a certain indirect way. They had a right chamber of culture, and basically there's a difference in developing propaganda channels, like, I think input developing inside their country, and then the influence on output. They had censorship, like a bureau of censorship, and that's what cut a lot of these things. Now, Goebbels' most valuable technology, and the one I got him in a second, was the radio. And I heard a story, I think I heard it in my Understanding Human Diversity class, and there was a lady who was a mom, and she was like a breastfeeding mom, that stage of life, and her baby was on a ship, and they were going through customs to go away from Germany, and literally everything stopped when Hitler came on the radio. Her baby was in front of her crying on the boat, but they were not allowed to let her on the boat because it was a rule. When Hitler came on the radio, there were loudspeakers everywhere, and everyone had to listen. So that was really how the Fuhrer connected with his people. Now there was also the Reich Radio Company. It was very political, had some entertainment that Hitler liked, like opera, but nothing creative. And I thought it was interesting that they really liked to include gender roles. So like wives were housewives, but they also wanted the housewives to rule in a way like Hitler would, kind of. Like there was some program on the radio to help them rule like that. And then the widest form of illegal activity, the book said, was listening to foreign radio stations, because part of indoctrination is not letting any outside sources come in. Now the Reich Film Chamber produced 1,097 feature films. A sixth of them were openly political. The themes included Volksgemeinschaft, anti-Semitism, patriotism, and self-sacrifice. But the book claimed that, we claimed that they never produced anything great. The press, the press was the oldest form of media. In 1933, there were 4,700 daily newspapers, but the Nazi removed most of them because of the political discrepancies within National Socialism and what they were trying to do. So basically, if you have
one kind of paper that you're allowed to read, and it's the same stuff printed over and over, and nobody's pushing the boundaries of creativity, your people are going to lose interest, and they're not going to read it as much. So the emphasis was on its censorship was preventative rather than creative, and I think that really took a toll on how effective it was. So with culture, there's like, some people believe Nazism was anti-intellectual and some people don't, but they definitely felt threatened by intellectuals regardless of people's opinion, and it kind of left a vacuum in culture. So there was a complete void in literature. Music was just kind of stagnant. It didn't really, decrease in quality or increase in quality. And then production of art was just low quality because they were only allowed to paint and make certain things. And that really affected their culture. The Chamber of Literature, it controlled all the publishing houses and all the bookshops. It banned 2,500 German authors, especially Jews and left-wingers. And then they burned books that Goebbels deemed unfit for Nazi Germany. If you've never read The Book Thief, that's it's just an incredible book that pushes the boundaries of creativity, and the reason why it's called The Book Thief is because there was a little German girl, and there's a huge pile of books burning, and she just was really little and slipped and grabbed one of the banned books that was burning. So that's how the book got its title, but I would suggest it if you've never read it. And then the Reich Chamber of Visual Arts. So there's 42,000 practicing artists registered. They could ban any degenerate art that wasn't fit for Nazi Germany. And it just produced very bland pieces. It was led by a man named Ziegler. So the Chamber of Music, there was no Jewish composers allowed. No degenerate music, you're going to see that word a lot. No corruption from outside sources. No American jazz or swing, which I think is interesting because if you think about jazz, there's typically a large African American culture in jazz, and they really just were racist. And so if that's what was creating it, then...
You ever see the movie Swing Kids?
Uh-uh.
It's set in Germany, and it's about youth that would go to these secret clubs where they play.
Oh, they did mention that in the book, but I didn't really understand what that meant.
Yeah, it's a movie. It was a movie that came out 20 years ago.
Okay.
It's been a while, but it basically describes these sort of rebellious youth.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things they did is they would go to these sort of secret clubs, and they'd play the music. The records were banned. They'd get some of the smuggle in the records.
Yeah, that's cool. They're definitely dissenting youth, but we'll get to that in a little bit. 2 levels of propaganda. One was disseminating Hitler's ideology, and the second was making pragmatic adjustments. So basically, when they were first promoting Hitler, they were like, he was at his prime. So they were defeating France, and it was blitzkrieg, lightning warfare, and it made sense. So they were like promoting the idea of war, total takeover. But then as war went on and they started failing, they had to maintain the experience of war. And I think Hitler gave a speech called Total War, and they just kind of had to maintain the fight even though they were losing. So, who was responsible for indoctrination, propaganda, and then the coercion and terror? There's Joseph Goebbels, and he was, I'm pretty sure he's the guy that had like physical health issues, right?
Yeah.
And so it's ironic that he's promoting, like some of his posters you'll see are Hitler viewed as like strong, blonde German, and he's nothing like that. And then Heinrich.
That was Hitler.
Yeah, I know. So he dominated the coercion and terror aspect. In fact, this book is called Let Me Go, and it's based on, it actually is a true story. So this little girl, her mother was one of the SS guards in, I want to say Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And this is a story of how terrible her relationship is with her mother, because her mother did all these terrible things, and she never, ever apologized or went back on the mission. She actually worked directly with Heinrich Himmler. The mom did. So she abandoned her family to work with him at a concentration camp. And even when she was dying in a nursing home, she never went back, because indoctrination does that to people. You just, if you're told a lie 1,000 times, it doesn't become a lie anymore. It becomes the truth. So Goebbels is who we're going to focus on, though, because he did the indoctrination and the propaganda. And he basically said it's not enough for people to be reconciled to our regime, to be persuaded to adopt a neutral attitude towards us. Rather, we want to work on people until they have capitulated to us. So he wanted total capitulation. In fact, I think, and I don't say this because I agree with what he did, but I think he was a genius for what he was able to accomplish, and also a lunatic. His tactics were taking full advantage of technology of the day, and by doing this they could achieve maximum saturation and create complete loyalty and subservience. And this is really where he succeeded. He used the principle of simplicity for all to understand. Even the smallest man on the street, he said, would be able to understand what they were getting across, because the political ideology is abstract and up here, and it is kind of intellectual, and so what he did was boil it down so everyone could understand it. And I already mentioned this, but he said, a lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. Popular themes to promote with propaganda was their people's community, because, oh no, go back. Sorry, okay. And this was popularized in World War I as Germans rallied support for the war. And it was just all about breaking down elitism, because their economics are so bad, and uniting the classes to achieve national purpose. Anti-Semitism, of course, we know this. They viewed and propagated the belief that Jews were inhuman, and they made them the scapegoat through which all problems were blamed. So there was a ton of posters to choose from, and just basically all the posters about the Jews, a lot of them make them look like devils, just the way that they're approached. And so they believed that the Jews were taking their jobs and ruining their lives. The best target for indoctrination, and that would come from the means of propaganda, is youth. So the book assesses the impact of Nazi indoctrination on Germany's youth specifically, and they want to see how successful the curriculum and teaching methods were, and how successful the youth initiatives were. So the education reforms were led by Bernard Rust, and they just totally flipped the education system on its head. And if you remember, in one of the videos we watched, Hitler really didn't like the education system. He thought he was above it. And so it makes sense for him to totally go in and kind of like destroy it for his causes. The impact on school. The book says teachers became the most disillusioned of all Germans. They were promised a lot, and they weren't really given those promises. There was major miscommunication between departments, between the Ministry of Education and the censorship office, and the Gestapo reported deliberately uncooperative teachers. But really, what Lee was arguing was that they probably weren't deliberately uncooperative. They probably were just confused, because if we, had textbooks in here, and let's say we were taking a math class, and the book was just full of like, how many Jews can a concentration camp hold? What's the proportion? And just totally like putting in these subtle things, it took away the integrity. So they said Nazi schools were ample evidence that education becomes weaker in direct proportion to the strengthening of doctrine. So I think that's interesting. Emphasis on youth. These young people, this is what Hitler said, I think, these young people learn nothing else but to think as Germans and to act as Germans. And what's interesting is Hitler was saying, what if the parent doesn't capitulate to the cause? What if they don't turn over? Well, Hitler would just say, your child belongs to us already. and he would say, "What are you? You'll pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in a new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." So going back to the village illustration, the kids that were brought up in that village, in that experiment, knew nothing else except for that experiment. Their parents and their grandparents knew that there was another world out there. But the kids that are growing up in this, and what you'll see like in the book Thief, if you ever read it, is that these kids are just totally, this is what they know. This is their life. If they say that the Jews are bad and that we need to bury the Jews, then we will. They said in the village, red is bad, bury red. They buried red and they didn't know any better. So basically they just were brainwashed in their new community. So this is one of the last slides. Some statistics. All Germans ages 10 to 18 were compulsorily recruited into Hitler's youth initiatives. And it kind of lists some of the youth initiatives, but they also had one for girls. It just wasn't as good. And we'll see like a lot in this kind of community. The education was just really bad, even with youth initiatives. Just was promoting terrible things. So the impression that the Hitler Youth left, the Hitler Youth was the incubator that maintained this political system. They had a direct relationship to the SS, and if you think about it, there was older military leaders that could no longer, or didn't, want to be in leadership any longer, and so who was going to come in? The people from the Hitler Youth were going to come in and take their roles in fighting. So also having the youth so enamored with the cause, it helped curb criticism from the parents, because if you think about it, like if all the kids are forced to wear the color purple and the parents' generation didn't really like purple, they would have to get over it because they love their kids and they're going to love their kids even in the color purple. So there were dissident youth who had a lesser impact, but they were there, like Dr. Weinland mentioned, like the swing kids, and then the kids that try to help break down the youth. So some of the questions I'm going to leave you with is, which areas did the Nazis most successfully control the mass media and the culture? And was there a Nazi information and cultural revolution? And have you seen these techniques utilized in today's society?
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I think we still have a couple of minutes left. Let me see. Not very many, but a few. So let's, the idea of propaganda and indoctrination. These are certainly nothing that we're unfamiliar with today. Some of the films, I think one of the film makers of this period, who is famous for her propaganda, her name was Leni Riefenstahl. Did they mention her? She did Triumph of the Will. Triumph of the Will becomes, if they say, well, everything about it was bland and nothing was creative or something, which I can understand why they'd say that. But I would say her work and a lot of her techniques actually people have imitated. I think as one of your assignments, one of your video assignments, I won't have you watch the whole thing because it's quite long, but you'll see the techniques. Hitler comes flying in through the clouds, and lands on Nuremberg, and then they have big marches and parades. Yes?
I think what he was saying was the films why they were bland is because they were so bleak. And I think the best thing about films is not, they're not telling you what to think.
Right. And she was, parts of it were subtle and parts of it were not, but she used a lot of imagery. She used a lot of camera angle, all this kind of stuff film people like to study, that have been imitated, and she was probably the most famous. At least, of course, I don't I don't study all of Nazi film history, right? But she's certainly, I would think, one of the most famous. And Triumph of the Will. So I will try to set up a this week. This week your assignment is actually 2 assignments, so it's 2 weeks. So we're catching up, but it's the same film. The film that you have this week is actually was a mini series that was divided into 2 nights of like an hour and 25 minutes a night, and it's on the rise of Hitler. I think it's called something like Hitler, the Rise of Evil, and so or something. I think that's the title. And so it goes through from very quickly when he was born and up to the time that he's probably about 20, and then his time in Vienna, and then his time, in Munich, and then, the next night, then he gets arrested, and then the second night is while he's arrested and after that. Yes?
You say this is the same, video we're watching. We're still doing like 2 assignments, whatever, 2 weeks assignments.
Yeah, there'll be 2 video assignments for this week because you didn't have one last week.
So for which week is it?
Well, you'll do them this week. They'll be due by Sunday night.
So like which ones are they? Like week 4? The one on this week?
I think it's 5 and 6.
It's whatever's on a week 6.
Video assignment 5 and 6. But look under week 6, and that's where you'll find it. Both of them are there. Yeah.
Just on